Hello and welcome to Fox Gaming. Today I will teach you the basics of Warhammer 40,000 10th edition, 40k for short. In this video we will go through some core concepts and how to play the game. Also we're going to go through what Warhammer 40,000 is. If you watch this video until the end, you will have a good concept of what Warhammer 40k is and how to play the game. I will go into more detail on the rules in later videos, but for now we will keep it really basic and simple to understand. So, what is Warhammer 40k? Well, it's a tabletop war game in which players command armies of miniatures and attempt to defeat their opponent through a mixture of skill, tactics and luck. On the table you can see a mixture of miniatures that is used in this game. To the left we have the Tyranids from the Hive Fleet Kraken. In the middle we have the Eldari, and to the right we have some Space Wolves. Each player will control an army. Depending on the game played, the size of that army will vary. The game is played on a gaming board. As you can see, the miniatures are standing on a gaming board. Behind the miniatures we have a measuring stick that measures inches, and behind that we have some terrain features. In the front we have some dice, and they are used for determining different results during the battle. To the right in the front we have some objective markers, which are also used in various missions. And that is a good segue into the core concepts of the game. To play Warhammer 40k you will need to first select a mission. There are lots of different missions, but here we have the only war mission that is included in the core rules of the game. We will go through this mission so you can learn how that works. As you can see, the mission will have rules for how to muster your armies, mission objectives for this specific mission, how to create the battlefield, and determining who will be the attacker and who will be the defender. It also has rules for battle formations, which we will go over at the later stage, how to deploy your armies and determine who gets the first turn, and resolve pre-battle rules, beginning the battle, ending the battle, and determine the victor. Each player controls an army. An army consists of units. In this Tyranid army we can see it's 2 units, 1 unit of termagants and 1 unit of a trigon. Each unit consists of X amount of models. For example, this termagant unit consists of 10 models, while this trigon unit consists of 1 model. Every unit has a datasheet which explains all the rules for that unit. When you deploy your army, you deploy units, and each unit have to deploy together. That will mean that the trigon, for example, will be able to deploy alone, while these termagants will have to deploy all 10 termagants together. The units have to be in unit coherency. For units that are 6 models or less, like these striking scorpions over here, that means that every model will have to have one other model within 2 inches of another model. And here we can see that every model has at least one model within 2 inches of them. For larger units, over 6 models, such as these termagants over here, they have to have 2 friendly models within 2 inches of them. So as you can see here, this termagant has this one and this one, this one and this one. So they have actually 4 miniatures within 2. But the rule is they have to have 2 miniatures or 2 models within 2 inches of themselves. Here we have an example of a unit that is not in unit coherency, because one striking scorpion is more than 2 inches from the rest of the units. And here we also have an example of a unit not in coherency. And this is because this is a unit of more than 6 models, so every model will have to have 2 models within 2 inches of them. So this one over here does not have that, and this one also do not have that. So this is not unit coherency. Unit coherency is also measured vertically, and that is 5 inches that you need to be within. So you can see here the termagants are upon the building, but are within 5 inches vertically of 2 friendly models. So this is unit coherency. In this game, models are fighting in various ways, and one of them is close combat. So now we will talk about engagement range. To be within engagement range, you need to be within 1 inch of an enemy unit. In this example, 3 of the striking scorpions are within 1 inch of the termagants, which means they are within engagement range. The 2 striking scorpions in the back are not, however, and we will come back to how that works later. Games of 40K is played on a battlefield with various terrain features, as you can see here. Usually a battlefield is 44 by 60 inches, but here we have just an example to show how everything works. Next we'll go through how measuring distance work. Because we are playing a game using inches, we have to know how to measure them. And when you're measuring between models, it is always the closest point of a model's base to the closest point of the other model base. If the model does not have a base, like this Land Raider over here, you measure from the closest point of the model, like this is the closest point from the model to the termagants. Measuring distance is a very important concept in Warhammer 40K, but so too is determining visibility. These Space Wolves or Space Marines have hidden behind this wall, and that means that these termagants cannot see them. And if they cannot see them, they cannot shoot. There are 5 different ways to determine visibility. The first one we have already discussed, where the termagants could not see any models in the Space Marine units. But here we can see that one Space Marine is behind this barricade and is partially visible. And to determine that, we will say that this model is visible. If we remove the barricade, this model is fully visible because none of the model's arms, legs, head or weapon or anything is behind cover, so he is fully visible. In this example, the unit of Space Marines are visible to the termagant units. And if we remove the barricades, the Space Wolves are fully visible from the termagant units. There will be instances like this when some of the units are fully visible and some of the units are not visible at all. To determine visibility from this case, the unit is visible, but one model is fully visible. So, to recap, if you cannot see any of the enemy models, the unit or models are not visible. If you can see any part of a model, then that model is visible. And if you can see any model in a unit, that unit is visible. For a model to be fully visible, every facing part of that model can be seen. Then it is fully visible. And if the unit is fully visible, every model in the unit is fully visible. So that's the recap. Next, we will talk about dice, because dice is used to determine various results when playing a game. To play this game, you will only need d6s. Normally, you will roll d6s to determine results. Like this, we roll 1d6 and we get a 3. Sometimes you can be instructed to roll a d3, and that is basically the number you get on the die, halved by 2 and rounded up. So in this case, when I roll one die, I get a 6, which means I get a 3, because 5 and 6 equals 3. You can take 6 divided by 2, you get 3, and you can take 5 divided by 2, you get 2.5, but you round up, and then it becomes a 3. You can also be instructed to roll 2d6 3d6, 4d6 and beyond. If you roll 2d6, you take 2d6 dice, roll them and add the results together. In this case, I got a 5. Lastly, we have rerolls, and rerolls is basically that you have thrown a die and you get to reroll the die, so you can roll that die again. Bear in mind that if you are rolling a 2d6, for example, you will roll both of them together when you reroll, like this. First I got a 3, now I got a 4. This is not true, however, if you are instructed to roll X amount of d6s, because then you can only reroll one of them, unless otherwise specified. So in this case, I roll 5d6 to determine an attack, for example, and I get one reroll, so I can reroll one of the dice, turning that one into another one, but that's beside the point. The last core concepts we'll go through is battle round, player turn, and phases. A game normally consists of 5 battle rounds. Each battle round consists of 2 player turns, which means each player gets to play 1 turn. Each player turn is divided into 5 phases. That is the command phase, movement phase, shooting phase, charge phase, and fight phase. In the command phase, both players muster some strategic resources and test the will to fight. In the movement phase, your units maneuvers across the battlefield and reinforcements enter the fray. In the shooting phase, your units fire their ranged weapons at the enemy. In the charge phase, your units move into combat in close quarters with the other units. And lastly, in the fight phase, the units are fighting in close combat. To illustrate what we have talked about, I have set up this mini-game between the Tyranids and the Space Wolves. The players have created their armies and deployed their forces, and now they are ready to fight it off on the battlefield. The first thing that happens is that the player rolls off to see who goes first, and the highest scoring number usually starts. So the Space Wolves will get a 1 and the Tyranids will get a 6, which means that the Tyranids will get the first turn. Now, it's the first battle round and the first player's turn. The Tyranids are starting, and the first phase in their turn is the command phase. In the command phase, the Tyranid player and the Space Wolves player get 1 command point. I usually just use a die to remember how many command points are left on each side, but you can write it down or use other tokens if you like. Since this is a basics video, we will not go into command points at this stage, but just know that they are used for strategic stuff that you can do with your armies. We are still in the command phase, and now we will test if our units are battle shocked. This requires a unit to be below half strength. As the Tyranid unit is not even wounded yet, they will not need to test, but we may come back to this step later. Now we move over to the Tyranid players' movement phase. In this phase, the Tyranids can move up to a maximum distance that is allowed on their data sheets. In this case, the Termagants have a move of 6, which means that they can move up to 6 inches in any direction. Here we can see that the Termagants have moved closer to the Space Marines. They move their full distance up to 6 inches to get closer. Next, we have the shooting phase of the Tyranid player. This is where the Termagants can shoot at the Space Marines. And you have to check the data sheet for what kind of weapon they are equipped with. This unit of Termagants are equipped with Devourers. And then you have to check the stats of the weapons to see how many shots and how well they are to shoot with those weapons. In this case, each Devourer have 2 shots each, and they are 10 moles, so that is 20 shots they get to shoot at the Space Marines. On the weapon profile of the Devourer, it says that you need a 4 up or 4 or higher to hit with the shot. 20 attacks going into the Space Marines needing 4 or greater to hit. So we roll all of the dice and pick out every die that is not a 4. So all the 4s, 5s and 6s have hit the Space Marines. The next step is to determine how many of the hits that are wounding the Space Marines. And to do that, you have to look at the strength of the weapon that is fired against the toughness of the unit that is fired upon. If the strength of the weapon is equal to the toughness of the target, you will need 4s, 5s or 6s to wound it. If the strength is lower than the toughness, you will need 5s and 6s. And if the strength is half of the toughness, you will need 6s. If the strength of the weapon is higher than the toughness, you will need 3s, 4s, 5s or 6s. And if the strength is double the toughness, you will need 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s and 6s to wound. As an example, if you have a strength of 4 and the target toughness is 4, then you will need 4+ to wound. If your strength is 4 and the target toughness is 5, you will need 5s. And if the target toughness is 8 or more, you will need 6s. On the other hand, if your strength is 4 and the target toughness is 3, which is less than 4, you will need 3s, 4s, 5s and 6s. And if your strength is 5 and the target toughness is 2, you will need 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s or 6s. In this case, the strength of the Tyranid weapons are 4 and the toughness of the Space Marines is 4. So what do you think that they need to wound on these rolls? I will give you a couple of seconds to think about it. And if your answer was 4 or greater, you would be right. So we roll all of our hits and tries to get 4 5s or 6s. And we get 2 4s and 2 6s, so 4 wounds in total. Next, we will have to see if the Space Marines are saved by their armor. This is called an armor save. The armor save of the Space Marines is written on their data sheet. In this case, I will just tell you it is a 3+, which means that they have to roll each of these 4 wounds and try to get a 3, 4, 5 or 6 on the roll to save the wound. So we roll all of the wounds and we get a 1, a 3, a 4 and a 5, which means that the Space Marine unit takes 1 wound. Each of the Space Marines have 2 wounds each, so we just put 1 die at the base of one of them to illustrate that he has lost 1 wound. Next we go into the charge phase, and this is where the Tyranid player can elect to charge the Space Marine unit. They don't need to do it, but they can if they will. And for this example, they want to charge, so we are going to roll to see if they can make it into close combat. When trying to charge, the player who controls the termagants roll 2d6 to try to see if they can get enough inches to get into engagement range. As we discussed earlier, engagement range is within 1 inch of the enemy units. I have already pre-measured this, and I know that the Tyranids will need a 7 or more to get within 1 inch of the Space Wolves. So let's see if they can make it. And they don't, they only get 4 inches, which will get them to here. And that means that the charge has failed and they have to stand still. Next, we have the fight phase, and this is where we determine close combats. In this battle, there are no close combats because there are no models within engagement range. So the turn of the Tyranid player is done and we move over to the Space Marines turn 1. The first phase in the Space Marines turn is the command phase, and this is where both players get 1 command point for their army, as well as checking for battle shock. As we discussed earlier, battle shock will need to be tested if a unit is below half strength. As this is not the case, we move to the next phase, which is the movement phase. In the movement phase, the Space Marine player moved their unit closer to the termagants. They want to shoot them and get into close combat, so this move is imperative to get as close as possible to make it so that they get a successful charge. But first we have the shooting phase, and the Space Marine player will shoot their bolters at the termagants. All of the Space Marines are equipped with bolt guns, and each bolt gun has 2 shots each. That means that the Space Marines can fire 10 shots at the termagants. Once again, to determine who can shoot, the units are ignoring models in their own units when drawing line of sight, so all of these Space Marines can shoot at the termagants. Checking the Space Marine datasheet, we see that the bolter has a ballistic skill of 3+. This means that all of the 10 dice needs 3, 4, 5s or 6 to hit the termagants. So let's see how they do. And they get, remember this one is not counted because that is the wound of the Space Marine, but we remove the 2s and the 1s and we are left with 5 hits. The strength of the bolt gun is 4 and the toughness of a termagant is 3. And that means that because of the strength is higher than the toughness of the Tyranids, they will need 3s, 4s, 5s or 6s to wound. So let's roll that now. Oh, and they get only 1 wound. Let's see if the termagant chitin can save it from the bolter round. They have a armor save of 5+, which means they need a 5 or a 6 on the wound die to ignore the wound. So let's see if they do. And they do. They get a 5 and saves themselves. The shooting phase is done and failed miserably, not killing a single Tyranid. And we go over to the charge phase. I have pre-measured and the Space Marine will need 3 or more on 2d6 to be able to go into close combat, or engagement range as it is called. And they will roll now and they get a 9, which is more than enough to get them into close combat. When moving into combat, you need to get within engagement range of the enemy unit, and that, as we have discussed before, is within 1 inch of them. Remember that your unit has to get within engagement range, and it's specified, so not every model has to get within engagement range. But you probably want to, because if you are not, you cannot fight. There is also another rule: you can be in base contact with a friendly model that are in base contact with the enemy to also be able to fight. In this case, as you can see here, this model and this model is in base contact with a friendly model that is in base contact with an enemy model. And that means that all of the Space Marines get to fight. So now we are in the fight phase and we have to determine who will fight first. There is a rule that says that if you charge this turn, you get a rule called fights first. If you have the fights first rule, you will, as the rule says, fight first. So in this case, the Space Marine player will do their attack first, and then the Tyranid player will get their turn. When your unit are elected to fight, you can first do a pile-in move. This move is optional, but if you choose to do it, you have to move the model as close as possible to the closest enemy model. In this case, all of the Space Marines get to fight, so they will elect not to use the pile-in move. But if they had, they could move 3 inches to the closest enemy model. Now, the Space Wolves are going to fight, and they have to choose 1 melee weapon to use in this combat. They are all equipped with Astartes chainswords, and they have 3 attack each. So that is 15 attacks that goes into the termagants. Looking at the datasheet, we see that Astartes chainsword hit on a 3+. So let's see how many hits. And they score 8 hits. The strength of the Astartes chainsword is a 4, and the toughness of the termagants is 3. So we know that they need a 3+ to wound. Let's roll and see how many they get. And they get 6 wounds. Now it's time for the termagants to make an armor save. And we know that they have a 5+ armor save, but the Astartes chainsword has an AP value of -1, which means we have to subtract 1 from the armor save of the termagants. And that means that they need 6s to save. Now, rolling the saves, we need 6s. and we get 3 6s, so only 3 termagants die. Now it's the termagant's turn to strike back, but first they can use a pile-in move, as the Space Marines could in their turn. And that means that every model is able to move up to 3 inches to get into base contact or into base contact with a friendly model that is in base contact. So here we can see that every termagant is either in base contact with the Space Marine or in base to base with a friendly model that is in base contact. So all of the termagants can make strikes. The termagants then chooses one melee weapon. They only have one and they have one attack each. They are not as good in close combat as the Space Marines, and they need a 4 up to hit. Rolling to hit, we get 4 hits. The strength of the termagant weapon is 3, and the toughness of the Space Marines is 4. So then we know that they need 5s or 6s to wound the Space Marines. Let's see what they get. They get 2 wounds. Now the Space Marine player can try to save the wounds, as the termagants do not have any minus on their AP from their close combat weapons. It's a straight up 3+ save for the Space Marines. So let's see if they save them. And they fail 1. And that means that this Space Marine who has already taken a wound have to take the second wound. He has lost 2 wounds and is removed from the battlefield. Now, both players have taken their turn, which means that the first battle round is at an end. And we start a new battle round, and begins with the Tyranid player once again. First, both players get 1 command point each. And then the Tyranid player has to check if any of their units are below half strength. In this case, they have lost 3 models and they were 10 models strong when they started the battle. So they are not below half strength and do not have to test for battle shock. Now the termagants have a choice. They can either use what is called a fallback move to get out of combat with the Space Marines, but if they do so, they cannot fire any weapons and they cannot make a charge. The other option is to remain stationary and be in close combat with the Space Marines and try to fight them off. So they will do that. Now it's the shooting phase, and since they are within engagement range of an enemy unit, the termagants cannot fire their weapons. If they have had pistols, however, they could, but they don't, so we move over to the charge phase. In the charge phase, since the termagants are within engagement range, they cannot make another charge and have to remain in close combat, so we go over to the fight phase. In the fight phase, no unit has made a charge and no unit has the fight first ability. So this means that the player whose turn it's not will start the fight. And that means that the Space Marine player gets to fight. They have lost 1 model, so instead of 15 attacks, they have 12, 3 per Starties. And because they are using their Starties chainsword that has 3 attacks each. Starting with a roll to hit, they need 3+. And they hit on a lot of them. They scored 7 hits. Now it's time to wound. They have a strength of 4 against a termagant's toughness of 3, so they need 3s, 4s, 5s or 6s to wound the termagants. And they get a lot of misses actually, and just wounds on 3 attacks. Saving throws for the termagants, usually a 5+, but because of the -1 AP on the Astartes chainswords, they only get a 6-up save. Let's see if they can save some of them. And they save 1, so 2 termagants are dead. Now the termagants can strike back, and as all of the models are within base to base or engagement range or in base contact with a friendly model that is in base contact, all of the termagants can make strikes. Once again, they need 4s, 5s or 6s to score hits, and they get 3 hits. And they have a strength of 3 against a toughness of 4 on the Space Marines, so they need 5s to wound. And they get 2 wounds. And the Space Marines can make saving throws needing a 3 up to save. And they fail 1 and they make 1. So we place 1 die with a number of 1 on, if I can find it, on one of the Space Marines. That is the turn for the Termagants, and now it's over to the Space Marines once again. They get 1 command point, as well as the Termagant player gets a command point, and they have to check if they are battle shocked, which they are not, because they are not below half strength. In the movement phase, they also can make a fallback move, or they can remain stationary. In this scenario, they choose to remain stationary to fight it off in the fight phase. In the shooting phase, the Space Marines are actually able to make a shooting attack, and this is because they have pistols. Pistols can be shot when within engagement range, and each pistol has 1 shot each, and they hit on 3+. So we will roll and see how many hits they get. They get 3 hits. The bolt pistols have a strength of 4 and the Termagants have a toughness of 3. So the Space Marines will need 3, 4, 5 or 6 to cause a wound. And they get nothing. Now it's the charge phase, but as the unit is in close combat already, they cannot make another charge move. So we move over to the fight phase. In the fight phase, you have to check if any units have the fights first ability. In this scenario, no units have that ability, so once again, the player whose turn it's not chooses which unit that fights first. So the Tyranid player can strike first. Only 5 models remaining, and that means 5 attacks, needing a 4 up to hit. And they hit on 4 of them. They have a strength of 3 against a toughness of 4, which means their strength is lower than the target toughness. And that in turn means that they need 5s or 6s to wound the Space Marines. And they get 2 wounds. The Space Marines get to save, and they have an armor save of 3+, which is not modified by the close combat weapon of the Termagants, because they do not have any AP minus. So a straight up 3+ save. And they saved both of them. The Space Marines can strike back with their Startist chainswords, and they have to get 3s, 4s, 5s or 6s to make a hit. And they get, oh, that is a bad roll. They only get 1 hit. Strength of 4 against toughness 3 means they need a 3 up. And they get it. Termagants will save with a save of 5+ -1 because of the Astartes chainsword. They need 6s to save. And they don't, so 1 Termagant is dead. And that is the end of the second round. Now we start the third round with the Tyranid player's turn first, and they get a command point, as well as the Space Marines get a command point as always, but now they have to test for battle shock because their unit is below half strength. To test battle shock, you roll 2d6 and compare it to the leadership value of the unit that is depicted on the datasheet. The Termagants have a leadership value of 8, so they need to roll 8 or greater to not be battle shocked. And they get a 4, which means that they fail their battle shock test. When you fail a battle shock test, a couple of things happen. First of all, their objective control is turned to 0, which means that they cannot hold objectives when they are battle shocked. Also, you cannot use stratagems on a unit that is battle shocked. We will go into greater detail about that in a later video. The third thing that happens is that if they choose to fall back from a combat, they need to take desperate escape tests, which we also will cover in a later video. For now, they will just remain stationary and fight in close combat. Once again, we skip the movement phase and the shooting phase, as they cannot make any of those moves or shooting attacks. And the charge phase is also skipped because they cannot charge. So it's into the fight phase. And the Space Wolves will start to fight because it's not their turn, as we have discussed earlier. Still 12 attacks and they need 3s to hit. That's better. Once again, they need 3s to wound and they get 3 wounds. The Termagant gets to save with a -1 penalty because of the Astartes Chainsword, so they need 6s to save, and they save none, so only 1 Termagant remains. That Termagant still can strike though and needs 4s to hit. And they hit, needing 5s to wound. And they wound! And the Space Marine can try to save on a 3-up. And he fails, and that means that this one that's already taken a wound is killed. And with that, we will end this basic tutorial. Please leave a comment down below if some of the rules was unclear. In the next couple of videos, we will go into more detail on the different phases, so subscribe and like the video to stay up to date with the content that will be released soon. Thank you for watching and have a nice day. This is it for now. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content like this. By subscribing, you'll stay up to date with our latest videos and be a part of our growing community. We appreciate your support and it encourages us to create more valuable content. So go ahead, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and we'll see you in the next video.